on for a long time about the list of accomplishments credited to Charles Moore and his contribution to architecture. I'm not going to go on for too long, but I think for those of you who don't know very broadly what his background is like, I will hit a few highlights. Beginning at the University of Michigan in 1947 with his Bachelor of Architecture degree, he moved on to teach architecture at the University of Utah, earned an MFA and a PhD from Princeton, and where he also taught. He chaired the architecture program at the University of California at Berkeley from 1959 to 65, and was a partner in Moore, Linden, Turnbull, and Whitaker out of San Francisco from 1962 to 1965, during which time he designed, I think, one of the most pivotal pieces of American architecture, the Sea Ranch. He was partner in the successor firm, MLTW Moore Turnbull, from 65 to 70, and designed the faculty club at the University of California at Santa Barbara in 68, which I think you also may be familiar with. He headed the architecture program at Yale University from 65 to 71 and remained a professor there through 75. He chairs his own firm in Essex, Connecticut, and also began practice in conjunction with Urban Innovations Group Los Angeles in 1974. And among all the pieces of architecture that he's had published and won awards for, we find Kresge College at the University of California in Santa Cruz, and with UIG, St. Joseph's Fountain, Piazza d'Italia, New Orleans in 76. He's written a number of books and articles, among them The Place of Houses with Dunn and Linden and Gerald Allen, 75, Dimensions with Gerald Allen, Body, Memory, and Architecture in 77, and he's received awards from the AIA, from Progressive Architecture, Sunset Magazine. He's a fellow of the American Institute of Architects and the 1979 winner of the Arnold W. Brunner Memorial Prize in Architecture, American Academy of Arts and Letters. Having Charles Moore here tonight makes me feel like a student again, because during the time I was in school in architecture, Charles Moore was, for us then, one of the big heroes. He's still one of my heroes. I hope one of yours. I'm glad that he's here tonight. I hope you are too. Charles Moore.
Great. Next time I won't fall over it on the way in. Thank you. I'm announced tonight to talk about cities by the river, which is something we thought up over the telephone. What it really is about is not just rivers, but cities by the water and people by the water, with the hope that that special element with its various qualities will bring up lots of things about what we all are and what we do that go past I hope the water itself. So it's cities and us by water and water among us. What architects do when they talk, as you will have noticed, is come to say, well, the format normally is to show a lot of very pretty things that other people have done, and then unobtrusively slide from that into one's own work in ways that will suggest that I, for instance, am the natural outgrowth of Louis Kahn or something like that. And I almost always do that, but I'm going to forego it a little bit tonight. What architects also do, and I think it's right we should, is to try to figure out where we stand, where in the history of the world we fall, and what we might do about it. I'm fond of shouting from platforms, and have for decades, that we stand at a fascinating point at the end of a long and successful, partly successful, partly unsuccessful revolution, modern architecture, in which architects since about 1915 have sought to explain a vastly changed world, a 20th century world, with buildings that adhered to principles that we set about making up. One of the things about the beginnings of all that was that history, the things that had gone before, seemed like an unnecessarily weighty albatross around the neck of civilization, and that seemed useful to put it aside to try to do something that was against history, was altogether new. That I'm not here to argue that that wasn't the right thing to do, or perhaps the only thing to do at that point. But what happened, since the years went by, as they must, is surely that the past, even the past starting in 1915, began to grow big and weighty again. And this time around, it's turned out to be, ears are ringing, it seems to be essential that we fit ourselves into what exists and to what the planet is already like, that we pay attention to our own memories and to the memories of the people who inhabit the buildings we build, that we depend again on a long past full of enormously successful buildings built over the last 5,000 years in various places on the planet, and that we look to make our own thing as part of that and not as a standing away from it. I'm fond of recalling a moment when I went, 3 or 4 years ago it was, had been on a jury in California and went with a friend had been on the jury afterward to a piano bar. I'm not very big on piano bars, but this seemed a very nice one, with some woman who played very well and who was playing show tunes, Stephen Sondheim, things like that. And after she'd been playing for a while, a man came in with a clarinet in a little case and took it out, put the clarinet together. They had obviously never met one another, but started playing together, and it was wonderful. I gradually noticed that they never played the tune. They both knew the tune, so we knew the tunes, and it wasn't necessary that they play the tunes. They were making wonderful extensions and variations on those already known by us and well-loved melodies. And it seemed to me that our own time is or might be like that, in which the macho statements of the last half century have been made, so many that we don't really need anymore, and that we might look forward to, maybe now, to a very pleasant and exciting half century of developing the themes that are already around us, of dealing with the things that people know and love and have in their memories and their pasts. Is that me? And make, well, the Chinese, who know all about these things, have stated it for a long, long time in terms of yin and yang, of the yang as the forceful, they call it masculine, aggressive piece, which needs exactly as important recessive, they call it feminine, piece, so as to have yin yang, a completion of opposites that makes the world work. And if we can think of the buildings, of the architectural history of the last half century as a very heavy dose of yang, then we get to look forward, I think, to, I hope not quite so oppressive a dose of yin in the, of recessive, of fitting, of yielding, of dealing with what's there and what's in people's minds for the period ahead. If one believes that, and I do, then water, the great yin element on the planet, becomes something of vast importance indeed, where we see water, we know about water, which doesn't have a shape of its own particularly, but takes the shape of the vessel that it's put into, but is capable of changing the hardest stone over long enough if it chooses, if it lasts and wears away. And we're also conscious of water as being, wherever we are in the world, connected to all the rest of the water in the world. There's a favorite story from the 400 years ago in Japan at the time of the great tea masters, in which one of them, excuse me, need the water, had a garden, a very beautiful garden with a tea house in it by the shores of the inland sea, a particularly beautiful stretch of water and rocks, wild water sometimes. The garden was built so there was a wall between it and an incredible view, and the only time you got to see the view was when you came and bent over the little bowl of water that you dipped your hands and face into. And when you dipped down, there was a little opening, and outside was the sea with the rocks and the pine trees, and you were meant to make the connection that the water out there and the water here in your hands was all part of the same thing, which humankind has long believed all the water to be. It could be argued that for a long time that the mystery of that, the special poetic power of that was a function of people not knowing how the water kept moving on our planet. Plato, you'll recall, had a theory that sort of like a seesaw, in which I never did get it straight, but the water is up here and flows down, and it flows back, and that keeps it going. In the Middle Ages, there are wonderful drawings of great spouts out beyond the Straits of Gibraltar somewhere where nobody had seen them. Therefore, they might be the way the drawing showed, in which the water, which had been coming out of the sky and flowing down streams into rivers and into the sea, was sucked up again to where it might start the cycle over, since it was clear that some simple thing like evaporation wasn't going to do any such thing. And it wasn't until the early 18th century, in the 1720s, that a learned paper at an Italian scientific meeting finally described water the way we know it works from our junior high school textbooks, in which it falls out of the sky, goes into little streams, thence into rivers, thence into lakes, and finally into the ocean, and then is evaporated up again into the clouds, from which it does it all over again. So there is a connection now, explained but still pretty powerful, that hooks together all the water in the world. Quite different from asphalt, for instance. You know, when you see one piece of asphalt, you don't, your mind doesn't take poetic leaps toward all the rest of the asphalt that there is on this planet. It's just never made it. Maybe it does happen that way for a few. So, dealing with water, and I got excited enough about it to do a doctoral dissertation about it 30 years ago. Dealing with water is a matter, I think, of making contact with that cycle, with all that water that represents the rest of the water in the world, so that there's a sense both of immediacy of your being right there, and of infinity of that water stretching away to the distant depths of the sea where the mermaids are, and all the other places where the heart goes. The Architectural Review, the British one, who must have been 30 years ago, had a series of articles about it that I found very poignant, that described a process they call mental leaning out over. Talked about how wonderful it was to be right by the very edge of the sea, particularly, and out on a dock or a pier or something out over that, so that you were in your, perhaps with your body, certainly with your mind, leaning out over this edge, this magic place where the two come together. So the slides tonight are talk about that sometimes in rivers, sometimes in miniatures of the rivers and fountains and other architectural manifestations, and end with altogether too many pictures of a few recent works of ours where that's been a concern. Can we do the lights?
Beautiful, right on the roof.
Wow, they're big. This is one of the really magic places by the side of the water, Portofino, where the town square, which comes right up like town squares do, and among the buildings, is a sloping plain that slides pretty quickly down under the sea, so that all the mysterious lore of the sea, the notion of engulfed cathedrals and mermaids and intrepid people going to the depths, plays itself out right there, right where you're having lunch, and makes the sea, in fact, a part of the central square of the town. It's also interesting, I think, that though the sea in the Mediterranean is, in these pictures, and usually quite docile, there are times when it gets wild, altogether out of hand, and a part of the excitement of being at the edge of it is that it's not under human control. It's another world altogether, a world that we can't normally breathe in or survive in. And when we put something up against it, the way these bollards have to be put up against it, they have to take a shape that's dependent on and comes from the power of that water, even on this big inland sea. When it's the Atlantic, or a bigger ocean, the power gets much heavier still, and in a place like the Cobb at Lyme Regis on the south coast of England, this piece of stone, the Cobb, keeps off the much more powerful waves. The only other way to keep the waves off is to do it, is just the opposite way around, to do something very thin, that the waves can come, thin and strong, that the waves can come right by. Notice that the colors are either black or white, all there or not at all. Ever since people have had a literature, there has been excitement about the sea and going to it. Melville, perhaps the best known of the 19th century writers, who talked about the magic for a young man in a small town inland of following a stream down, like this one in the Cotswolds in England, finally to the ocean, to the distant place where contact is made with all the mystery in the world. So a town like this, Lower Slaughter, becomes vented and connected with all the world by this little stream going through it. A highway wouldn't have done the same job. Sometimes that action of the river gets very much extended. In Cambridge, England, the Grata and the Cam running through town, that's me, make a place where all the so-called backs, really the fronts of the colleges of Cambridge University face this waterway, which serves as the kind of string on which the beads are strung, which is experienced by a curious primitive method of locomotion of the boats called punting, which features pushing on a stick until it gets stuck in the bottom, and then you get out of the boat and into the water because you've inadequately controlled the force. With banks, it's interesting to note of all kinds of degrees of formality, of stone walls or grassy slopes or even buildings, with the lawns of King's, Queen's College, the others, as frames for their most carefully shown-off architecture. With the stream on the left hand coming on around and under a bridge, altogether urban by this time. In Bamberg, in Bavaria, on the right, the stream is even wilder as it goes under the town and serves at once to extend the rather small open spaces that there are in this medieval town, to give, as on the right-hand picture, a chance to look at buildings from some distance, or even as in the left-hand picture, underneath the Rathaus, the town hall, it really opens up, and it's like pulling the rug out from under the tight-packed activities of the medieval city. In much of the world, in the dry parts, the water, just a little bit of it, serves as an organizing framework for political bodies and for farms. In the part of Morocco shown in the right-hand picture, the water is so far down under or in a deep ditch that it doesn't even show from the surface until the water wheel pulls it up and carries it along that rickety aqueduct to where it's used for farming. That carrying of water in the desert has served as a basis for architectural ordering of things for a long time. In the Kutubia at Marrakesh, the courtyard of the mosque in Morocco, the scheme, since orange trees need water, and there isn't a lot of water just lying around in desert places, the scheme features piling up the dirt, as you see here, to make channels into which water can be poured to water the trees. In what used to be the courtyard of the mosque, now the Cathedral at Cordoba in Spain, still dry, the same is made a little more precise with stone edges. I don't know whether you can see it well in this picture, but the palm trees, there's one over there, don't need water around their trunks in the same way, and therefore have their own wells quite independent of this system. And then in Sevilla, in what used to be the courtyard of the mosque, you got a really carefully paved courtyard of orange trees, watered by fountains, with the water coming in little slots, just a few inches wide and deep. They're shimmering on hot days, hot, dry days in the bottom of those cool little ditches as they go, channels, as they go on their way to the tree trunks. Making patterns that are interrupted, made a little more mysterious by the bricks that bridge the channel there on the left. And the right is a similar but different pattern in the Alhambra in Granada. There again, coming out of cool, dark rooms into the blazing summer sun with reflections and the sound of water that makes it all cool. There's an oasis at Sidi Hazem outside of Fez, where the water comes up in in an oasis with palm trees around, and then flows away into the desert. It seemed to me exciting that the flow, which shows on the right, is not interrupted by a causeway or a bridge, but there are instead there are a set of stones past which the water visibly flows to get out away from the pond and into the stream and into the desert. Some of the most powerful images in human literary history are of engulfed things, like an engulfed cathedral or the lost Atlantis, and something as simple as these steps at the foot of the main street in Lisbon going down into the Tagus play on that magic. So does the Barcaccia, the worthless boat, in the Piazza di Spagna in Rome, done by Gian Lorenzo Bernini's father, Pietro. He did it. He was asked to do a fountain at a time when they had discovered in Lake Nemi, not far from Rome, the ruins of some vessels that had been sunken there in some mock naval battle of ancient times. And the whole notion of the sunken boats was so exciting to him that he made this sunken boat. He shows it sunken by putting water in it. And the marvel of it is, I think that even now, 500 years later, and with Fiats, thousands of Fiats crashing their fenders against each other inches away from it, that thing sunken down and with its images still of boats under the water is a place of considerable peace, if that's possible, in the middle of all that tangle of traffic. The other implications of water, the sexual ones especially, have been of interest. Early movie directors, most of you didn't have to put up with all that, but early movie directors, when they wanted to show that people were achieving union, were given to showing either fireworks going off or waves crashing up on a beach. This fountain on the left at the Royal Palace at Kiley in Portugal, with its undressed nymphs coming up out of the wet and squirting in water out of trumpets, is playing on some of the same themes. Hadrian played on them a little bit too in his villa, Tivoli, with an island which was his favorite place of refuge, with the whole notion of island as appears in this boat in Kiley, as a very special place on the face of the earth, limited and surrounded by the alien and yet all embracing element. So he went there with his favorites when he would enjoy a little bit of seclusion just across that tiny little bagel-shaped stretch of water, which he had a drawbridge to cross. Oops. Oh, God. What do you suppose is the next thing that happens? Is, great. That's another shot across that little water at the center of Hadrian's Island. And then a piece that I like very much in Coimbra in Portugal, which is, again, very near the traffic, but you can see a set of cars out the back in the right-hand picture. What it is an island, round island raised up in the middle of a rectangular panel of water with access from the four sides underwater. Well, you don't get wet, but you go down a couple of steps below the water level, so you're having poetically a crossing in which you're submerged, or in which the seas have parted, or however you wish to take it. But anyway, it makes it a very special trip to the place where you go up some steps to the island, from which you can, which has a source in it, a little fountain, from which you can go out across a quartet of bridges to the little chapels in those cylinders out beyond, which are actually back on shore again, but you don't need to know that. There's on the left the steps down under the water and out again. On the right, the source, thing that marks the advent of a little bit of water, a tiny bit, that marks the middle of that raised island. And there's some streetcars out behind showing how near they are, but it doesn't really matter, because those few small-scale devices have put that place on an island and far from everywhere. The other picture is of another aspect of water, which is that it flows downhill and has to be shot free from buildings, which gives either very simply, as here with a set of Spanish roof tiles, or in much more complex ways, a chance to shape buildings. Uh-oh. These are water shapes. The one that seems curiously dark is some rocks at the shore, Newport, where the shapes. Oh, I see things with tweezers going on. Great, thank you. The shapes are rock, but the fluidity of them, like that of the sand around the rock, is it's upside down, which is why, don't worry about it, which is why it may seem a little funny, but it manages to be fluid, though rocky. Antonio Gaudi, in his Well Park, dealing with the same phenomenon, builds a fountain out of fluid forms, which he turns into a lizard, while the water comes down over much more straight-edged geometric rocks underneath in a little channel that provides the sound and the splash. Whatever have we done? Great. The fluid sculptor's device of making the stone do the fluidity of the water comes off triple in places like the Piazza Navona of Gian Lorenzo Bernini, where I think you can see it better in the right-hand picture. There is marble cut into the muscles of horses and people, human legs sticking down from the top. Then travertine, which has been smoothed over, made so that the water seems to have formed it, and then other travertine, you can see it farther up on that, rough, and so the water hasn't gotten to it at all. So there are, with the two kinds of stone and with various treatments of it, degrees of relation between the water and the rock of the sculpture, with water coming down always, and then a flip of the dolphin's tail to suggest the completion of the cycle. The advent of water, less in Italy, where there's a lot of it, than in Spain, where there isn't, is often the opportunity for making the sculpture of a nozzle in which the tube of water and the more curvilinear shape of the metal have a great deal to do with each other. It's nice, but great. Would it work if when I did the one that seems to work, you just did the... Oh, okay. Burned up the offending slides. These are two shots of the same piece in the entry patio at the Alhambra, so as to see the incredible subtlety of their shaping of the thing, so that when the water splashes out of that thing in the middle, it's coming out very slowly in the left-hand picture and with some speed in the right. Then it makes ripples like you would expect it to in the circular basin until it hits the scallops on the edge, whereupon, and you can just see it in that light some places, a set of radials from those points are made that come cutting back across the stronger concentric circles of the basin. Then when it goes off, it becomes a placid bowl of water above other water. The boys at the Tartaruga Fountain, the tortoise fountain in Rome, are sculpted on a fountain which didn't have very much visible water in the old days. In the time when these Roman fountains were made, each was the end of an aqueduct bringing water from far away, as it had in ancient times. And those aqueducts came with varying degrees of force, of heads. So this one in the Piazza Mattei had little visible head. They were able to get the water up to that bowl and have it splash down, as you see, between the boys and out of the heads of the fish. But to complete to give you the sense of the water up there, to complete the sense of something happening, they used the actions of the boys pushing the tortoises up over the brim to suggest the completion of the cycle. Now it's not hooked to the aqueduct anymore, so the water, when it's on, plays higher than it used to. You can see it in this picture. In Batalha in Portugal, there's a fountain where you don't even see, or you get just a glimpse of the water in the basin, but the energetic curlicues of all the stuff around suggests flashing. On the left is a fountain in Philadelphia where they often leave the fountains on in the winter when the ice forms, and the ice river gods are a lot sweller than they are normally. At the Library of Congress fountain in Washington, they don't. And poor things. The MIT Chapel, which is by Eero Saarinen, which is a very interesting and quite beautiful place to be in the summer when the water is in this pond and is shimmering, reflecting up onto a Bertoia sculpture, which is inside, is left high and dry when winter comes. I claim at least partly because the buildings, the architecture doesn't do anything to acknowledge that it's done the very important thing of leaving the land and is passing over the water. Here's a real bridge, and that building hasn't even noticed. So winter is a kind of embarrassment. That doesn't happen in tide pools, places along the ocean's edges where amazing things happen, where miniature worlds full of the most extraordinary rock landscapes and creatures are inundated by a wave, and then the wave drains away and leaves them small and quiet again, just in time to be hit by the next one. and the rhythms of all that and the waves, of course, exceed any complexity that we've been able as humans yet to get into our fountains and our gardens. This is the patio of the Cypresses at the Alhambra, at the Generalife rather, in Spain, where I think it's interesting that middle part, the fountain and the basin around it, managed to seem at once distant on an island and sunken, like the stuff that you go down the steps into the water for, by this very tiny edge here. So there's a ridge there, so that part is lower by a fraction of an inch than its water. And so it's at once an island and a sunken one, made wet by all the water splashing around it. And this one in Sevilla, what is fascinating, I think, is that when the pond is very shallow, a fraction of an inch, it's of course very smooth, and the waves are just, you see them over here again, just barely existing. Of course, great gardens made with all these principles and these images put together. The Villa d'Este in Tivoli was made in the 16th century to celebrate all the things that could happen when you dammed up a river in the hills just outside of Rome. A river comes from up here, and they would dam it up until 11 o'clock each morning and then let it loose. And it would come down past these great big fountains, across in a row of water, down here and across, and then show up in fountains down here and in more elaborate fountains over there where ancient Rome was reproduced with water squirting out of it. In the beginning times, you entered there past just a little bit of water uphill, and it got more and more and more and more, and finally you were in a great big fountain there with views of this bigger one, and the row of water, and then you went up and into the courtyard of the villa, where there was one tiny little squirt to remind you of all the stuff that had gone on before. Things have changed there. By the 18th century, it had gotten to be picturesque ruin like that, and in the 20th century, it's sort of a combination of the two. You come in from the top and don't have the sequence, but you have a magnified set of amazing waterworks with water coming high up beside you so that you feel on the edge of being drenched all the time, with water splashing down the cross axes into big basins. And in front of, see the human face over there, and in other places there are real live tourists walking behind in similar circumstances, while the 100 fountains splash down in long troughs as on the left. Really wet. Coming down beside you in the handrails, sliding and splashing and crashing around in a little miniature shell, and little waterfalls then come down and slide down to the next one, or on the wall of 100 fountains disappear into the mouth of the drain. Over on the side, there's still pieces of the ancient Rome fountain with filled up with water, sunken barge, and water squirting out of everything, cascades, the works. In Braga, which is a pilgrimage place and very holy in the north of Portugal, there is a long flight of steps that people used to ascend on their hands and knees as a penitential act on their way to the chapel at the top. They seldom do that anymore, but they get to see the water, which starts by coming down on the columns that flank the entrance. And then the place was big on healing, and so the motif as you go up is all the things places where things can go wrong, and water as a symbol of the blood of Christ, pouring out of these poor chaps, so that you can reflect on the possibility of your own sick nose being cured by the time you get to the top. And ears, there's some I've left out. And Noah's Ark, riding above all the water in the world, dripping very softly from the base of the waves. Numbers of fountains have been made in the 19th century especially that were very specific. There is an old story in Denmark that some lady whom I'd not like to meet, named Mother Denmark, was told that she could have a country as big as she could plow around in some limited period of time. So she turned her 6 strong sons into oxen, a not very motherly act, if you ask me. And there she is, beating on them so that they will plow up as much of the edges of Denmark as possible during the time at hand. At the other end of them, water comes squirting like steam out of their noses, and at this end, the water and land being turned up by the plow is represented by all that water. In Mad King Ludwig's Linderhof, the water is Cupid's arrow. And in this really very strange fountain in London, the water only shows up like in a slot machine right there. It's real. You can stick your finger in, and it celebrates the apparently not extensive virtues of Queen Alexandra. The presence of water being what it is, that is flat, has been exploited by people engaging us in where we are by tricks of paradox. Fond of this one in the Grand Allée at Versailles, looking out of the palace, where everything is architectural in the foreground, those urns and pedestals and stuff, and even the trees, so that you see that as level. And it takes a long time before you can bring yourself to realize that water is not tipping up back out there in the long canal, but it must be flat. That's the way water is. And this is on a slope. It's amazing how powerful that is to pull you into it, to involve the onlooker in the participant, if that's what he is, in the place, that sense of unease and the mental effort that you have to make to straighten it out makes you a part of it all. It's easier, maybe more romantic in a Japanese stroll garden where the water of the lake is amplified by these tiny ponds that are in the surface of the rock across which you come, and given the kind of traditional Japanese footgear, the wooden sandals, you're extremely aware of yourself and the possibility of breaking your ankle. And so a trip across these stone by stone with that extra little bit of water is a pretty powerful device for engaging you in it. The Trevi fountain in Rome, probably the most wonderful single piece of water that the people have produced on this planet yet, was built, in fact, in the 1720s, was started in the 1720s, as a direct result of that momentous announcement at the learned scientific meeting that disclosed how the water cycle really worked. And we have here a poetic interpretation of that with King Neptune, who represents the water coming down out of the sky, and river gods and horses and stuff. Well, water comes down every conceivable way, we'll see in a minute, to this basin, which is under the surface of the streets, and therefore capable, like the Barcaccia in the Piazza di Spagna, of making you feel separate and apart from the city. And the basin does represent the sea, and then it all starts over again with Neptune. Well, again, as in the Piazza Navona sculpture that I showed a minute ago, the travertine is shaped, as the water goes over it, smooth, or as the water doesn't go over it, rough, and is different also from the marble of the horses and the river gods, so that the interaction between the water sliding down and the sculptural, the stone from which it comes, is made everything of that they can, with finally down at the bottom the gentlest hint of the water squirting skyward again, going up in its evaporation to the clouds, with wonderful tide pools and shoals and falls and delicate little curtains of water and single rivulets. Every possible set of shapes, especially like this one where it slides down into a kind of trough past this rough travertine on both sides. Quite different, all that, from back to water in a river in the city. The next slides are of the Seine in the middle of Paris, which is held in very tight stone banks because it floods. But those stone banks are shaped in ways that let people get fairly near the river to fish or to sit or to climb up out of their boats. With the streets and now superhighways, it's a mess. These are valuable pictures because you couldn't take them anymore, mostly. And trees at the edge and by the upper rails up along the street level. With that intermediate level far enough under the street so that it's quiet, there used to be, and far enough above the river so that it's dry, with chance for the river's mists to make it more mysterious, or for the water to come when the street's on a very slight angle and it rains, and make something special again of a graduated edge. With the walk down from the street to that edge, something very special, into a special world by the water. And when you get down, there's action in the river, cargo boats going by and passenger boats. A very different waterfront on a river in Porvoo in Finland, with much more modest buildings and little stone bases out at the edge of a bigger piece of water, which, among other things, when you're on it, serves to distance you enough from the town so that you can see it all. The buildings pile up and make a single visual thing out of it. The Cordoba does not want to leave us. This picture of Turku, also in Finland, will be joined in a minute, I hope, by another. I show it both for the stone base that comes up out of the river, which is particularly strong and successful one, I think, and for the only Doric gas station I know of, which is, again, one of the finest gas stations going, in my opinion, although not useful for large trucks. Is it a goner? Is it down in there, or can we go on and skip it? It has two at once, a notoriously unpopular thing. Just yank them out and we'll go past it. Great, thank you. See, it's just the same as the other picture, but what can you do? Taking one picture of a Doric gas station, you've taken them all. Two other places, Amsterdam on the left, where the canals make with the quality of light they give, make a special situation for the streets and even for the houses, which have been painted by painters from Vermeer on since, with their big windows letting in the dimmer light of the north and the reflected light from the canals. On the right, some buildings tight against the river lake at Lucerne, with the amazing covered bridge with lots of paintings in it that goes across the body of water from side to side, with with a couple of riverside ways of doing things. On the left, Switzerland again, Lucerne, with again that amazing thing when there's clear water of the bank just sliding down and under it, steps and rocky bank alike. In Benares, Varanasi, on the shores of the Ganges, people bathe, since it's a holy river, and conduct their whole lives on those little platforms that are made of wood, or as in the foreground, or of stone higher up, where they surround themselves with privacy and do their religious acts and live their lives on that set of ghats, of steps that come up out of the holy water. Strasbourg, where in some slides from very long ago, where the river is extended by just a little bit, with steps up to a paved area around which some houses are, so that the open space, tiny as it is augmented by this piece of continuity of the river. And at a whole other scale, a house in Newport with its own porch and its shelter from all that water looks out at it. That gets us to a briefer part, which is various things that mostly these next are going to be things that I've been in on to try to cope with those reactions to water that I was just describing. This is Lovejoy Fountain with Larry Halper and me 15 years ago now. A low budget, so that everything had to be built with, we chose to build it with 2x6s. The concrete is piled up behind, and then a lot of water pouring up out of that upper basin. This is a model still, splashing down a cascade in which the water makes lots of forms. The concrete 5.5 inch steps don't hold a candle to the power of travertine at the Trevi to have all kinds of responses to the water's presence. But it does move through a set of stepping stones, based, as you will note, on the ones at Sidi Ahrazem that I was showing a while ago, and down into what was going to be a maelstrom until the sucking everything under into the middle, until the Portland Parks Department decided that there might be children sucked under, and we couldn't do that. So it's now a basin. What we were anxious to have is a very close connection between people who were there. This is 15 years ago, or 17, when that wasn't nearly so much expected as now. A close connection between people and that water, so that they would be encouraged to engage in kind of mental leaning out over. We were successful beyond our wildest dreams at the opening to hippies, for Portland was a hippie center, yanked off their clothes and slid down the waterfall, thus setting the stage for the years after that, when there were 2 hippie weddings and in the fountain, and so many premarital incidents that the Women's Association in the high-rise SOM building right next door tried very hard to get the city to fill this with geraniums instead of water, feeling that would be less encouraging to what was going on there. I'm happy to say, didn't succeed. Here's the water sliding off the edge on the right-hand picture, and after a rain, which there are lots of in Portland, we can see how hard we've tried, but how infinitely inferior all this is to the water really coming off those different kinds of travertine at the Trevi. So it's concrete, wet and dry, but there is a lot of nice water, and people still are attracted to it crawl up it, sit on the pinnacles and have lunch. Or walk across the stepping stones or sit on them. With, as you see, quite simple shapes made by the tuba sixes, but quite complex shapes made by the water crashing over them. There people are examining the prospect of climbing up it. It was 10 years after when we started the Piazza d'Italia in New Orleans, which I find interesting in connection with the first one, because by 10 years after, the abstractions that we felt it necessary to engage in on the Portland one had seemed much less in need of being abstract. The Portland fountain was based, according to Larry Halperin and to me, each of whom claims to have designed it, on a waterfall in the High Sierra. We each claim a different waterfall, which is interesting, but clearly it's been taken a long way from the waterfall in the mountains to this set of concrete steps. The Piazza d'Italia, 10 years later, is meant to be a celebration for people of Italian ancestry in New Orleans. And so we all sat around and said, what is the most Italian thing we can think of? And somebody said, how about Italy? And the rest of us say, yeah, Italy. And so we by that time had it in mind to scrunch up a set of stripes into a shape, and the shape became Italy. And water could run down the Po and the Arno and the Tiber, and we liked that. I said, wonderful, we can have tiki torches at Vesuvius and Etna. And the Italian committee said, no, that's bad taste. I never have understood that. But it is interesting that water is good taste and fire is bad taste sometimes. But we said that wasn't enough water yet. And so somebody, I think it was I, said, how about the architectural orders? They were made by Italians with some help from the Greeks. And we can squirt water around in them. And everybody said, fine. And this is the Tuscan one off on the left. And so we did that, and lots of water splashes around, and makes when they turn it on, a creditable fountain. Although I think what's interesting about it, why it's nice to be there, and I like very much being there, is not that its statement of purpose. What it really is a fountain, and the purpose of a fountain is to squirt water and make people happy. And this, when they turn it on, does squirt a lot of water. It is made with big pieces that surround spaces that are pleasant and quite special to be in, like that one where those two guys are sitting out on a peninsula near the Tyrrhenian Sea. We got more and more wrapped up in the special, unabstract things that water could do, and I got especially excited by the Doric wall, which is this one in the left-hand picture, in which water would come down through Doric columns that were more like Doric helmets, with light inside at night, shining up under the waterfall that crashed down inside this dark helmeted shadow. We were excited about having little mushroom jets up in what we call the wetapies. I thought it was going to be just wonderful to have big truck windshield wipers above the arch, splashing the water as it came down back and forth. But I was told that was extremely poor taste. And the next thing I knew, they had surprised me with my face, which I think is pretty poor taste, too. We did try in some places to carry with the abstraction so that the bases for the columns with what would have been moldings on are sliced flat with beautiful marble, and only the side suggests the shape that the molding might take. You can see the same thing happening in these ones in the left-hand picture. And we thought that to have the stone get abstracted, but to try to make the water as realistic as possible with real water acanthus leaves and all the other pieces was the right way to go. So that the ionic capital is wrought ionically of stainless steel, and the marble base of I guess it's the composite column is scraped flat. With one day a restaurant to rise behind glass between the columns up and top, and meanwhile on the occasional fiestas in the watery place. The chances to deal with cities and with water in them are increasingly numerous. This is a report familiar to some of you, on an attempt about 5 years ago to deal with the greater Miami River as it goes through Dayton. As most of you know, there was a disastrous flood about 60 years ago that caused, with many lives lost, that caused big levees to be made on both sides of the river. So though it goes through 4.5 miles of Dayton, it hardly has gotten looked at over the last decades. And we were in a competition to try to remedy that, to make something nice happen to the river as it goes through downtown when a low dam was built, which was happening then, so that there would be some water in the river. And we won by saying we would not only open up a storefront office and have workshops with 50 or more people, and to do the thing on site and have lots of committees and groups to tell us what they wanted, but that we would have, in that instance, 6 one-hour primetime Sunday evening television programs about a month apart, with a bank of 6 telephones, staffed mostly by Miami architecture students, to transmit messages from people saying, I want a L-shaped swimming pool down by the river, and then we all got to act like architectural short order cooks and draw wildly and do the stuff. It, I think, worked, although we didn't know how to make all the things happen from there. And I don't have any pictures of the things that have been built. This is a gypsy violinist playing by the shores of the river while we stage a picnic lunch so people can come and look at it and see how wonderful it is. There's our office in an arcade in downtown Dayton. And there, some of us are drawing as the messages come in from what people want. Here, I don't have any pictures of the intermediate models, which are the most interesting, which were loose so that people could call up and say, I always hate high-rises by interstates. Why don't you pluck that right out of there and whoopee. So we came to a scheme which had been had literally been built over in full view on the television. And lots of drawings. A woman called in and knew about a canal that was buried deep under the streets. And we didn't know anything about it. Did some research and discovered that she was correct, and some effort started to pull it back out again, and it had been filled in. A sort of amphitheater and a concrete bank has been built. A kind of amazing fountain was built by the Kiwanis Club, designed by us, and tended by the Dayton Garden Club members in canoes. Came out to water the roses. And we planned for some much bigger things that haven't happened yet, in which the profit to the developer for doing a lot of housing in downtown right by the edge of the river was enough with some tax abatement to make, we thought, a San Antonio River-sized waterway, which is only, after all, about 25 feet wide, through the sunken part of the site where shops would be and boats could go, and that sort of Caesar Pelli-like community center could be built. I'm usually in charge these days of showing prize-losing solutions to competitions, but this, I'm happy to say, is a prize-winning one for the watery edge of Berlin. Out there is the Tegel Lake in the western edge of West Berlin. Up there is Karl Friedrich Schinkel's Schließlein Tegel, one of my favorite buildings. And in here until last week, a harbor, a little rectangular piece in from the lake, which carries some commercial traffic. The problem in one of the Berlin building exposition competitions, a limited competition that we were in, was to have housing, to have a recreation center since Berliners are really closed in the winter and their enclave, pools with waves and rivers to swim in and all sorts of things are very popular. So they needed that and a cultural center, which is here. And our notion was that the water could be pulled in. This is where you get off the end of the underground, come to it. So over here could be a cultural center, owing something to Schinkel and his Tegel Palace, and something to just warehouses along the water. That our model was tropical ports when the great big cruise ships come into them and people live in their little houses on the shore, while thousands of merrymakers stay on the ship, not very far away, but not mucking up the town with their presence. And we thought if we could have use the water to surround, to make a sort of cruise ship out of the swimming pool and the stuff that attracts thousands of people, that would leave the people in their houses along the edge able to enjoy the water edge, but more or less independent of it. The ship itself has changed a lot, but has an outdoor pool, an indoor pool behind, saunas and stuff up on these round, and a diving pool in that one, and various gymnasia. And then inside has palm trees and an air of fantasy to look out onto the snow-covered birches and stuff beyond, with restaurants and things like that. This is on the left, the view from the underground as you will come up to ground and look across the street at this little harbor. Like Portofino, the water comes sliding up onto the pavement. Or on the right, like Lisbon, the steps go down from the courtyard in front of the library to the waves. And the last thing is White River Park in Indianapolis, which you've all seen the model itself, so I won't thrust it too heavily on you, except to note that what seemed to us exciting about the chance to do something at the edge of the White River, with downtown over there on this left-hand picture, was, maybe I can show it better on the right, chance to come from the entrance at Caesar Pelli's Forsythia Bowl, because of this expanding grid, from something small to something big, from something architectural and straight edge to something botanical and rural and suitable for the edge of the river, and from something workaday to something increasingly fantastic. As you come past an open commercial area, past a hypostyle hall of cornstalks, and then pay your money and come into the Tivoli Gardens like Indiana Gardens, which are mostly, you can see them peeking out here from a new land surface, which is a apple orchard, sort of expanded and coming up to the crest of a hill where the captive balloon serves as the roof for a big round space underneath, with orchestras playing in the basket of the balloon, and then can go 1,000 feet up, higher than Caesar Pelli's tower, which joins it, and down again, with other water activities under domes with all the stuff like the Berlin swimming pools with waves and rivers to swim in over on this bank. The elevations along, this is Wabash, each street is named after a river of Indiana, quite properly, and goes from one-story buildings there. This is all the free commercial part with restaurants looking out over a square, the booths in Tarkington Square, and then here, which is there, is a not very revealing picture of the hypostyle hall made out of cornstalks with boats, metal cornstalks with boats sailing at their base. And here we start in with the gate to the gardens, and this is where you pay. And then there are metal apple trees developing as this moves more and more foliate, less and less straight-lined architectural, bigger and bigger, so that our notion was that at Disneyland, everything is a 4/5 scale or so, and then gets a little smaller as you go up. So you stay a little bit bigger than life throughout. And we thought it would be neat if, like Alice taking a pill, you could come in big and get gradually smaller as everything grew bigger around you. Uh-oh. Wait. Does it just not want to drop down? it's coming inch by inch. The part of the notion was that there had been a lot of talk about the waterways all through it, and the notion of people getting on barges and being able to go across to the zoo to see the animals seemed very nice. We thought it would be very nice if the animals could get on barges and come across and see the people. So there was two-way traffic on the water bridge across the White River, with chance for restaurants and places to sit in boats and hear music from bandstands and all those things, and something called the Indianapolis Seedway with bugs crawling fast on it. And a room under the balloon which rises up in, as far as I know, the decade's first architectural pop-up book, which we're trying desperately to find a publisher for, with people beside it. That wasn't too extensive a set of things based on water, of ours and of others, but more important, I think, than we can devote ourselves, like water does, to filling in between, making things reflective of the hopes and dreams and visions of all the people that might inhabit those things, so that we might get something a little closer to an inhabitable world. Thank you.
I don't know whether this is still working. We waited a long time to get you to come here. It was worth it. We're glad you did, and we hope that next time you won't wait so long to come back. We'd like to have all of you who are here join us at Butterfields for a reception for Mr. Moore, and on behalf of everyone here, I'd like to thank you again very much for coming. We're glad to have you. Thank you.